My name is Abigail, daughter of wisdom, wife of a man whose name many feared to speak. Carmel was my home, a quiet stretch of land clothed in vineyards and olive trees, where the hills rolled like folded linen beneath the sunset. From afar, you'd think peace lived here. But inside my husband's house, peace was a stranger. Every morning, I rose before dawn, long before the servants stirred. I would walk barefoot to the edge of the field, watching the sheep as the mist curled around them like silk. The earth smelled sweet, full of promise. I would whisper a prayer to the God of Israel, asking that he would make me gentle even when surrounded by harshness. My husband, Nabal, was a wealthy man, rich in land, cattle, and words that cut like a blade. His name meant fool, and though people feared him for his temper, they pitied me for my patience. But I had learned something. When you cannot silence the storm, you can still sing softly through it. I remember that morning clearly, the light golden, the servants bustling about preparing for the shearing feast. Laughter echoed among them, but I could sense a tension, an unseen thread about to snap. As I oversaw the preparations, a young servant ran up to me. His breath came in bursts. "My lady," he gasped, "men are coming down from the wilderness. They wear the look of soldiers but speak with peace. They say they are from David, son of Jesse." David. The name stirred in me both fear and awe. The warrior who once slew Goliath now wandered the desert as a fugitive. Yet many still called him the anointed of the Lord. I looked toward the hills where the road curved. My heart knew, something divine was unfolding, though I could not yet see its shape. The sun climbed higher that day, spilling its warmth over Carmel. The air smelled of wool, roasted grain, and fresh wine. Servants moved swiftly between baskets of dates and jars of oil, preparing for Nabal's grand feast. But my spirit was uneasy. Then I saw them, 10 young men walking toward the courtyard. Dust clung to their sandals, and their faces bore the look of men who had traveled long and hard. Yet there was something noble in their bearing, a quiet discipline that spoke of a leader worth following. They bowed low before my husband. "Peace be to you, and peace be to your house," one began. "Our master, David son of Jesse, sends his greetings. We have guarded your shepherds while they were in the wilderness. Not one of your sheep was lost. Please, therefore, give whatever your hand finds, for your servants and for David, your son." Their words were humble. Their tone, respectful. But Nabal's eyes hardened. He rose from his seat, his voice thundered through the courtyard like breaking clay. "Who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Shall I take my bread, my meat, my wine, and give them to men who come from I do not know where?" The servants froze. Even the wind seemed to retreat in silence. I felt my heart sink. The men from David exchanged quiet glances, their faces shadowed with disappointment. They bowed once more and turned away. That I watched them disappear into the hills, dust rising behind them like fading hope. I knew, this insult would not go unanswered. David was not a man easily scorned, and my husband had just thrown fire into dry grass. That I went inside, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the clay walls. My thoughts turned upward. "O Lord, why must wisdom live beside foolishness? Give me sight before the storm breaks." The afternoon sun burned low, spilling orange light across the hills. The house of Nabal buzzed with noise, servants laughing, wine being poured, meat roasting over open flames. My husband sat proudly among his guests, boasting of his wealth as if every coin could buy him honor, but deep inside me, peace fled. My spirit whispered, something is coming. As the feast grew louder, a young servant slipped quietly through the doorway and found me near the storeroom. His eyes darted around, fear shadowing his face. "My lady," he whispered, "evil is determined against our master and his household." My heart tightened that he continued, his voice shaking. "Those men who came from the wilderness, they were good to us. We suffered no harm. Day and night, they guarded us like a wall while we tended the flocks. But the master railed at them. He shouted and shamed them. Now, word has spread. David and his men are coming, with swords. The room spun for a moment. I gripped the edge of a table to steady myself. David, a man of valor, wronged by Saul, now wronged by my husband. A warrior with 600 hungry men, enraged and humiliated. The servant's voice trembled. Please, my lady, consider what you should do. For evil is near our master and all his household, and he is such a man that no one can speak to him. I looked into the servant's eyes, and I saw not fear alone, but trust. He knew I was the only voice of reason left in this house. I turned my gaze toward the hills where the sun was setting, its fire painting the horizon. I whispered to my heart, wisdom must act swiftly, before anger consumes the innocent. Without another word, I began to plan. Night descended swiftly over Carmel. The last laughter of Nabal's feast faded into drunken snores. The lamps in the courtyard flickered low, and the servants withdrew into silence, but in the shadows, I was awake, my heart pounding, my spirit whispering prayers into the quiet that I moved quickly through the storerooms, my hands steady despite the tremor in my chest. I had no time to think of fear, only of mercy. I ordered trusted servants to follow me silently. Bring me 200 loaves of bread, I said. And 2 skins of wine. 5 dressed sheep, roasted grain, raisins, and fig cakes, as much as we can carry. They looked at me wide-eyed, but none questioned. They had seen enough to know that when wisdom speaks in haste, it is because danger is nearer than dawn. Outside, the moon hung bright over the fields, its silver light bathing the land. The sheep stirred softly, unaware that their master's folly had placed every life in peril. That we loaded the donkeys with food, the scent of roasted meat mingling with the cool desert air. My heart beat like a drum beneath my robe. I thought of David, a man of God's anointing, whose heart had once calmed Saul's madness. Could that same man, in anger, destroy all that stood before him tonight? I whispered, Lord, I am only a woman. But you have placed me between wrath and blood. Let my words be oil to the flame. The last donkey was ready. I took one final look toward my sleeping home, toward the man who had brought this storm upon us. My love for him was bound not in affection but in covenant, yet still, I could not bear to see his ruin. Go on before me, I told my servants softly. I will come after you. And with that, I wrapped my shawl tighter and stepped into the night, following the winding road toward the wilderness, toward destiny. The road stretched before me, silent and endless. The night air was cool, and the stars burned bright like the eyes of heaven watching my every step. The donkeys moved steadily ahead, their hooves crunching over the rocky path. Each mile felt heavy with thought. Behind me lay a house built on pride, before me, an army built on anger. Between them, a woman with only words, faith, and food for peace. The wilderness whispered as I traveled, the wind brushing through acacia trees, the distant cry of a jackal echoing through the valley. But beneath the quiet, I could almost hear the low thunder of approaching feet, the march of warriors whose patience had run dry. My mind wrestled with questions. Would David listen? Would he see me as the wife of a fool, or as a messenger sent by God? I thought of the countless lives sleeping under my roof, servants, shepherds, children, all unaware that judgment could fall before morning. If I must kneel to save them, I whispered into the wind, then I will kneel until the earth itself takes pity. As we descended into the valley, the moonlight painted the rocks in silver. I caught sight of movement in the distance, torches, flickering like fireflies. My heart clenched. David and his men were coming, swords drawn, eyes blazing with vengeance that I urged the donkeys to slow. Stay behind me, I told the servants. If this is to end in peace, let it begin with one voice, not many. I stepped forward, the hem of my robe brushing against the dust. My pulse roared in my ears. I could feel the weight of destiny pressing upon me, and yet, a strange calm filled me, a peace not my own. Somewhere deep inside, I knew, this night will not end as it began. The valley narrowed, and the night thickened like smoke. Then I saw them, a line of men descending the ridge with torches blazing in their hands. The firelight rippled across their armor and faces, fierce and determined. At their head rode David. His eyes burned like coals beneath the glow of flame. His jaw was set, his hand tight upon the hilt of his sword. Around him, the sound of 600 soldiers breathing as one, men hardened by exile, loyal to the man they believed wronged. Every instinct in me wanted to flee, yet my feet refused to move. When David's gaze found me, he slowed his pace. The torches flickered in the wind, revealing me standing alone in the dust, a woman between armies. That I dropped to my knees. The stones cut into my palms as I bowed low before him. "My lord," I said, my voice trembling yet clear, "upon me let this iniquity be." The soldiers halted. Silence swept through them like a wind. Even the night seemed to listen. David dismounted slowly, his expression unreadable. "Who are you, woman?" he asked. His voice was rough from anger, and from sorrow. "I am Abigail," I said. "Wife of Nabal of Carmel. Hear the words of your servant." He stared at me, torchlight glinting off his eyes. The fury in him was a storm, but there was also pain, the kind that only a man hunted by his own king could know. Behind him, I saw his men gripping their weapons, eager for vengeance. My voice had to move faster than their blades. That I drew a deep breath and continued, "My lord, please, pay no attention to that man of folly, Nabal. As his name is, so is he, folly is with him. But I, your handmaid, saw not the young men you sent. Had I seen them, this shame would not have fallen upon my house." David said nothing, but I saw his jaw unclench slightly. I pressed on. "Now, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, seeing the Lord has kept you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself with your own hand, let your enemies be as Nabal." The firelight danced on the tears forming in my eyes. I could feel heaven standing near. I lifted my face just enough to meet his eyes. "Please, my lord, take this blessing which your servant has brought, and forgive the trespass of your handmaid. For the Lord will surely make you a lasting house, because you fight the Lord's battles, and evil shall not be found in you all your days." For a long moment, no one spoke. The desert air was still. Then, I saw something change in David's eyes. The storm inside him began to fade. For a heartbeat, silence ruled the wilderness. Then the night breeze stirred, brushing softly through the grass as if the heavens themselves sighed with relief. David's eyes stayed fixed on me, deep, searching, torn between wrath and wonder. The torches around us crackled, their light dancing across his face. I could see it, the weight of battle, the exhaustion of exile, the pain of betrayal. Yet beneath it all, there was a heart that still longed to honor God. That I lifted my eyes again, voice trembling with both reverence and strength. "My lord," I said softly, "when the Lord has dealt well with you, when he has set you ruler over Israel, remember your handmaid." For a moment, I saw his hand loosen on his sword. His breath slowed. The lines of rage on his brow began to soften. Then he spoke, and his voice, though low, carried through the valley like a prayer finding its way home. "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel," he said, "who sent you this day to meet me." The firelight glowed upon his face, revealing not a warrior, but a man humbled by grace. That he stepped closer, and I could feel the heat from the torches warming the cool desert air. "Blessed be your advice," David continued, "and blessed be you, who have kept me this day from coming to shed blood, and from avenging myself with my own hand." The words struck deep into my heart. My knees trembled with relief. David turned to his men and lifted a hand. "She has spoken wisdom," he said. "We will not lift our swords this night." I closed my eyes, and tears slipped down my cheeks, not from fear, but from awe. I had seen anger bend before humility, and wrath dissolve before faith. That he accepted the gifts I had brought, the bread, the wine, the roasted sheep, not as spoils, but as peace offerings between two hearts that feared God more than vengeance. Then he looked back at me and said softly, "Go up in peace to your house. See, I have hearkened to your voice and have accepted your person." The stars above seemed to burn brighter, and for the first time that night, I could breathe again. The dawn was near when I turned my face toward home. The stars faded one by one as the horizon blushed with the first light of morning. Behind me, David's camp grew quiet, a wilderness that had witnessed the battle between vengeance and mercy, now calm as still water. The donkeys moved slowly, their burdens lighter now that peace had been given instead of blood. The servants followed behind, whispering among themselves, astonished that a single woman's voice had turned aside an army. But my heart was not proud. It was trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what I had seen. As the road wound upward toward Carmel, I whispered prayers under my breath. "Lord," I murmured, "you held back the hand of destruction with mere words. Teach me always to speak with your wisdom and not my own." The sun rose golden, casting warmth upon the hills. The light touched the vineyards, the olive groves, and the flocks that grazed freely again. The land was safe for now, but as I neared the house, the sound of laughter reached my ears, loud, careless laughter. Nabal's feast had not ended, it had only grown louder through the night that my heart sank. There he was sitting at the head of a long table, his face flushed with wine, his voice booming over the music. He looked like a king without sense, a man whose pride was a crown of folly. I stood at the doorway, unseen, watching him raise his cup to toast himself. I wanted to speak, to tell him what had nearly come upon him, but his mind was lost in drunkenness. His eyes were glassy, his words slurred. And oh, this was not the time that I turned away quietly and went to my chamber, where the scent of olive oil and dust filled the still air. I knelt beside my bed, bowed my head, and whispered, "Tomorrow, Lord. I will tell him tomorrow." As I lay down, exhaustion pulled me into sleep, but in my dreams, I saw again David's face lit by torchlight, his fury turned to peace, his eyes lifted to heaven, and I wondered what it meant that our paths had crossed in such a night. Morning broke over Carmel with a golden hush. The vineyards shimmered in dew, and the smell of baked bread drifted through the courtyard. Everything looked peaceful, but within the house, my heart carried the memory of the night before like a hidden flame. That I rose early, before the servants stirred. The house still echoed faintly with the drunken laughter of the feast that had only ended hours ago. The tables were cluttered with empty cups and half-eaten food, signs of plenty, but not of peace. As I moved quietly through the halls, I saw Nabal asleep on a couch near the courtyard, his head resting awkwardly, his face pale beneath the morning light. The man who had shouted like thunder now lay still as clay. That I stood for a long moment, watching him. The smell of wine hung heavy in the air, then I whispered, almost to myself. "Now, my lord, you are sober in sleep, perhaps your heart will hear what your ears would not." When the sun was high and the servants began their day, Nabal stirred and rose. He called for food, his voice gruff, unaware of the mercy that had passed over his house like a shadow. "My lord," I said gently, stepping forward. "There is something you must know." He turned toward me, still weary, his temper simmering beneath the surface. "What is it, woman?" he barked. That I took a breath. "Yesterday, as you feasted, David, the son of Jesse, sent men to you. You spoke harshly to them, and in his anger, he gathered his men to come and destroy us all. But I went to meet him in the night. I took him gifts and pleaded for your life. The Lord turned his wrath away." Nabal's face went white. His eyes widened as if struck by lightning. For a moment, he said nothing, only stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Then his hand trembled, and his knees gave way. He sank onto the seat, his breathing shallow. His lips moved, but no words came out. I ran to his side, calling for servants, but his body was rigid, his face frozen in shock. Days passed. His strength did not return. He lay still, silent, eyes open but empty. And then, 10 days later, Nabal's heart stopped. I wept, not because I loved him, but because death had entered my house. I buried him with the respect due to any man, even a fool. Yet in my heart, I knew, this was not an end, but a turning. The days that followed Nabal's death were quiet, almost unnaturally so. The clamor of servants had softened into whispers, and the once busy courtyard seemed to breathe slower. The olive trees swayed gently in the wind, as if even they mourned the end of something that had long been broken. I spent my mornings in prayer, my evenings in silence. The house felt larger without his voice, but it also felt freer, as though a shadow had lifted. One afternoon, while I was instructing the servants to distribute bread to the poor, a vow I had made in gratitude for our deliverance, I heard the sound of hooves at the gate. Dust rose on the horizon, and a group of riders approached that my heart quickened. As they drew near, I recognized them, the same men who once stood in our courtyard carrying David's message of peace. But this time, they came not as supplicants, but as messengers of honor. They dismounted, bowed low, and one of them spoke, "My lady Abigail, David the son of Jesse has sent us to you, to take you to him to be his wife." The words fell like sunlight through cloud. For a moment, I was speechless. To be his wife? I repeated softly. The servant nodded. "Yes, my lady." Our master said, "Blessed be the Lord, who pleaded the cause of my reproach by the hand of Abigail, and who has kept his servant from evil. He remembers your wisdom, your courage, and your kindness." Tears filled my eyes. Not of sorrow, but of wonder. In the space of days, the God who had spared me from ruin was now opening the door to a new destiny that I bowed my head. "Arise," I said gently. "Tell your master that his servant is ready." Without delay, I gathered 5 of my maidens. I took no gold, no adornment, only what my hands could carry and my faith could bear. As I mounted the donkey to depart from Carmel, I looked once more upon the land that had been both my trial and my testimony. "Lord," I whispered, "you turn ashes into oil, and sorrow into song. Let my life be a witness of your mercy." The journey from Carmel to David's camp was unlike any road I had ever traveled. The air felt lighter, the sky wider, as though every mile carried me away from the weight of yesterday into the promise of something divine. The wind played gently with my veil as my maidens and I rode through the valleys. The scent of wild herbs rose from the ground beneath the hooves of our donkeys. And though I should have felt fear stepping into a life unknown, my heart was at peace, a peace born not of certainty, but of trust that we reached the wilderness where David's camp stood, rows of tents scattered beneath a ridge, men moving about with quiet discipline. It was not the grandeur of a palace, but there was order, purpose, and something greater than gold, the presence of God. As we approached, David came out to meet us. He no longer wore the battle-worn anger I had seen that night in Carmel. His eyes were calm, his face gentler, his presence both strong and humble. When he saw me, he smiled, not the smile of a king greeting a subject, but of a man who had found something rare, understanding that I dismounted and bowed low before him. "Behold, let your handmaid be a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my lord," I said softly. David stepped forward and took my hands, raising me gently. "Abigail," he said, "the Lord has surely sent you as a blessing into my life. When wrath burned within me, your wisdom turned it away. When pride led me toward sin, your faith reminded me of God's promise." His words filled my soul like the warmth of the sun after a storm. That night, the camp rejoiced. Music rose over the hills, not of war but of celebration. I sat by the fire, watching the men laugh, their faces bright with hope. For the first time in years, I felt like a woman who could breathe freely, not as one surviving under pride, but as one living under grace. And as I looked at David, the man who would one day be king, I whispered a prayer. "Lord, may I serve beside him not with pride, but with the same wisdom you gave me in the night of my trial." That night, after the music faded and the men retired to their tents, David and I sat beside a quiet fire. The flames danced gently, painting the air with gold and amber light. Above us, the stars stretched endless and bright, the same stars that had watched over Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I could hear the soft bleating of sheep in the distance, the hush of the wind moving through the valley. It was a moment heavy with peace and purpose. David's gaze was steady as he spoke. Abigail, he said, when I first saw you upon that road, I saw not a woman of fear, but a woman of faith. You stood between anger and destruction, between me and sin. The Lord used your words to save my soul that night. His voice softened. There are many who will stand beside me when I am crowned, but few who would have stood before me when I was wrong. I lowered my eyes, humbled. My Lord, I said quietly, I only spoke what the Lord placed in my heart. I am but a vessel. He smiled, that gentle, knowing smile of his. A vessel of wisdom, then, and I am grateful. For a moment, silence fell again, filled only by the crackle of fire. I felt the weight of destiny around us, unseen but near. I knew David's path would not be easy, that the crown he would one day wear would come through sorrow and battle. But I also knew the God who had chosen him was faithful, that he reached for a wineskin and poured a little into a wooden cup. The Lord has bound our stories together, Abigail, he said. You turned my fury into faith. I promise before God, as long as breath is in me, I will honor the wisdom and the courage you carry. I looked into the firelight, tears warming my eyes. In that moment, I saw not the shepherd boy nor the fugitive warrior, but the man who would one day sing psalms that heal the hearts of nations. I whispered, then may our lives tell of mercy, the kind that spares and the kind that restores. The fire flickered brighter, and the wind carried our words into the night like prayers. The days that followed were marked by dust, hunger, and faith. David's men moved from valley to valley, hiding from Saul's soldiers who hunted him like a lion hunts its prey. Every sunrise brought uncertainty, every sunset, another night of prayer, yet through it all, I found peace in the wilderness. The earth was harsh, yes, the stones cut our feet, the heat pressed heavy on our shoulders, but there was a beauty in that barrenness. It was there, in the emptiness, that I learned the voice of God more clearly than in all my years among the comforts of Carmel. One afternoon, as we rested beneath a great fig tree, I saw David kneeling a little way off. His harp rested beside him, and though his face was weary, his eyes were lifted toward heaven. He sang softly, words that would one day become a song. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God, my strength, in whom I will trust. His voice was cracked by dust, yet filled with fire. And as he sang, something stirred within me, the reminder that greatness is not born in palaces but in deserts. That night, as the men ate what little they had, I moved quietly among them, serving bread, speaking comfort, binding wounds. One of them looked up and said, My lady, how can you serve us with such joy when we are chased like dogs? I smiled gently. Because even a hunted man can be held by a faithful God. He lowered his head, tears glistening in his eyes. Later, David came to sit beside me by the fire. Your courage strengthens them, he said softly. Even when we are surrounded by fear, they see peace in your face. I looked at him and replied, Peace doesn't mean the absence of battle, my lord. It means the presence of God in it. He nodded, his eyes glimmering in the firelight. Then we are rich indeed. In the wilderness, our love was not born of comfort, but of faith, a bond woven by hardship, strengthened by trust, and sealed in prayer. The night came with no warning. The stars that usually shone like diamonds above the wilderness were hidden behind a heavy veil of cloud. The air was thick, the kind that whispered of danger before it arrived. We had set up camp near the hill of Hachilah, a place David often chose for its cover of trees. I had just finished tending to one of the wounded men when a breathless scout ran in. Saul's army, he gasped, they're near, less than 2 miles away. The camp shifted instantly into silent motion. Tents were lowered, fires smothered, weapons grasped. I could see the flicker of determination on the men's faces, not of panic, but resolve. David stood apart, his eyes scanning the dark hills. I could feel his spirit wrestling, not with fear, but with decision. Would he run again? Would he face the king who once loved him, now sworn to destroy him? I stepped closer. My lord, I whispered, the same God who saved you from Nabal's anger will save you from Saul's hand." He turned toward me, his jaw set, but his voice calm. "The Lord delivered me once from the paw of the lion, and again from the hand of the bear. He will deliver me still." He looked down the dark valley, where distant torches moved like stars crawling on the earth. "But I must go down," he said, his eyes burning with purpose. "I will see Saul tonight." I grasped his arm. "Then let the Lord go with you." He placed his hand over mine and smiled faintly. "And may his wisdom stay with you, my Abigail. You are the voice that steadies my heart." That night, while he and Abishai descended quietly toward Saul's camp, I knelt by the dying fire. My hands trembled, but my faith did not. I whispered prayers into the silence, not just for David's safety, but for Saul's soul. Hours passed like years. Then, as dawn's first light touched the sky, I saw them returning, David, carrying Saul's spear and water jug. Not blood, but proof of mercy that he had spared his enemy again. When he came near, his eyes found mine. "The Lord's anointed still lives," he said softly. "And my hands are clean." Tears filled my eyes. "Then you have conquered more than a king tonight, my lord. You have conquered vengeance." The wilderness wind rose gently, wrapping around us like a holy whisper. I knew then, David was not just chosen to be king. He was chosen to reveal the heart of God. Days turned into weeks, and though the wilderness still stretched around us like a sea of dust, there was something different in the air. A peace, not from safety, but from surrender. David had spared Saul again, and word of his mercy spread quietly among the men. They began to see him not just as a warrior, but as a man chosen by heaven itself. One morning, as the first light spilled over the hills, I found David sitting alone on a rock overlooking the valley. His harp rested across his knees, and a soft wind carried the faint echo of his song, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows." I approached quietly, my steps sinking into the sand. When he noticed me, he smiled. "The Lord gave me these words in the night," he said softly. "Even here, in hiding, his anointing does not fade." I sat beside him, looking out across the vast emptiness. "You are not hiding, my lord," I said. "You are being shaped. The wilderness is not your prison, it is your preparation." He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "And you," he said, "you have been my wisdom when anger blinded me, my peace when chaos raged. If the Lord has called me to lead, he has surely called you to remind me why." Tears warmed my eyes. "Then may we both remain teachable before him." He nodded slowly. Then he took a small horn of oil from his pouch, a remnant, he said, from Samuel's blessing years before, and poured a single drop onto his palm. The scent rose like sweetness through the air. He rubbed it across his forehead, whispering, "Your servant is yours, O Lord. Let my heart never outgrow my humility." Then, unexpectedly, he reached toward me. With his thumb, he marked a small cross of oil upon my brow. "This same anointing," he said softly, "rests on those who carry wisdom, not just the sword." The touch sent a shiver through my spirit, not of fear, but of holy fire. In that moment, I understood. I was not merely the wife of a man destined for greatness, that I was a witness to the unfolding of God's covenant, a keeper of grace amid the weight of war. The wind swirled gently around us, and I could almost hear the whisper of heaven, "For such a time as this." The seasons changed, but our journey did not. For years we lived between caves and fields, between promises and pursuit. The oil that Samuel had once poured on David's head had not yet turned into a crown, only into a burden that few could understand. Sometimes I would look at him as he sat sharpening his sword beneath the fig trees, and I could see it in his eyes, the weariness of a man who was called but not yet crowned, that he was brave in battle, yes, fearless in danger. But there were nights when I saw him alone, gazing at the stars, whispering words I could barely hear. "Lord, how long?" It broke my heart. Because I too knew what it meant to wait. To live between what God has promised and what your eyes can see. One evening, as dusk painted the hills crimson and gold, I brought him water. His face was streaked with dust, his armor dulled by use. Yet his eyes, oh, his eyes, still carried that holy fire. He took the cup and said quietly, "The men grow restless. Some ask if the Lord has forgotten us." I knelt beside him. "The Lord never forgets his word," I said. "He remembers even the smallest prayer whispered in the dark." He sighed deeply. "I have fought lions, giants, and kings. Yet this waiting, feels like the hardest battle of all." I smiled sadly. Because waiting fights not the body, but the soul. For a while, neither of us spoke. The desert wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of dust and time. Then he said softly, "Sometimes I think the Lord sent you to remind me of his timing. When anger burned in me, you brought patience. When pride whispered, you brought humility. When hope faltered, you brought faith." I felt tears rise. "And you, my Lord," I whispered, "have taught me that even in waiting, purpose breathes. You are not forgotten, only hidden until the right hour." He smiled faintly and looked toward the horizon. "Then may we keep walking until that hour dawns." And we did, one step at a time, one prayer after another, through dust and hunger and hope. Because faith is not just believing when the promise comes true, it's believing when it still looks impossible. It was near dawn when the messenger arrived. His robe was torn, his face streaked with dust and grief. His steps faltered as he fell before David, clutching the torn hem of Saul's royal cloak in his trembling hands. "Why, Lord," he gasped, "the battle has ended, the king is dead." A silence fell so heavy, even the wind seemed to stop breathing. David's eyes widened, not with triumph, but with sorrow. "How?" he asked softly. The messenger's voice broke. "The Philistines pressed hard upon him at Mount Gilboa. The archers wounded him sorely. And Saul fell upon his own sword." David's face went pale. He rose slowly, and for a moment he stood motionless, the weight of years pressing upon his spirit. Then he tore his garment, and all the men who stood with him did the same. That I watched from a distance, my heart breaking, not because the path was finally open to the throne, but because David's heart still wept for the one who had tried to destroy him. That he wept not as a victor, but as a servant. That he mourned Saul, that he mourned Jonathan, that he mourned Israel's fallen, and I wept too. Because in that moment, I understood what made him different from every other man who sought power. That he was not hungry for the throne, that he was hungry for God. Later that night, when the camp was still, I found him sitting alone near the fire, the torn piece of Saul's robe resting across his knees. The flames flickered, reflecting in his tear-wet eyes. "The anointed of the Lord has fallen," he whispered. I knelt beside him, my voice trembling. "The same Lord who anointed him has now lifted you, my king." He shook his head slowly. "I am not king yet, Abigail. Not in crown, though perhaps in calling." I touched his hand gently. "The crown will come, but what makes you king already is the heart that grieves when others would rejoice." He looked at me then, long, searching, tender, and said, "You always see what others cannot." And in that silence, I felt the Spirit of God near, a holy stillness that filled the space between us. This was not victory born of sword or blood. That it was the victory of mercy over vengeance, the proof that waiting faithfully never wastes time. It prepares hearts for destiny. The day came quietly, yet the air itself seemed to tremble with divine purpose. That we had returned to Hebron, a place of promise and history, the land of Abraham, where covenants were made and faith was tested. The elders of Judah gathered, their faces solemn, their voices low. They carried oil, not for battle but for blessing. That I stood at the edge of the courtyard, my heart pounding as David knelt before them. The same man who once hid in caves now bowed his head before the people, humbled by grace, not exalted by pride. An elder raised the horn of oil and poured it over his head. It streamed down his hair and onto his shoulders, glistening in the morning sun like liquid gold, and the people cried out, "Long live the king! David, King of Judah!" The sound echoed through the hills, and I felt tears rise in my eyes, not because he was crowned, but because I had seen the cost of that crown. He had worn hunger, fear, betrayal, and patience before he ever wore gold, and I had watched God shape him, stroke by stroke, through pain and mercy alike. When the ceremony ended, David turned toward me. His eyes met mine across the crowd, and for a moment, everything around us faded. That he walked to where I stood and took my hand before the people. The Lord who took me from the pasture to the throne, he said softly, gave me wisdom through the voice of this woman. Abigail, whose courage saved my soul and whose faith strengthened my calling. The people bowed, murmuring her name with reverence. I felt my knees weaken, not from pride, but from awe. Later that evening, as the palace lamps flickered and the scent of oil filled the air, David and I stood on the balcony overlooking Hebron. The city lights shimmered like 1,000 stars below. The Lord has done it, he whispered. Yes, I said quietly, he has fulfilled his word. He turned to me. And you, what do you see now, my Abigail? I looked at the horizon, where night met dawn. I see a kingdom born from mercy. A throne built on obedience. And a love refined by wilderness. He smiled, that same gentle smile from long ago, and said, then may we rule not with might, but with understanding. The wind lifted my veil softly, carrying our words into the night, a covenant not written on stone, but upon hearts, and I knew, at last, that every moment of waiting, every tear, every step of faith, had led here. To purpose. To peace. To the promise of God fulfilled. The crown came with glory, but also with gravity. In the early days of David's reign, the palace at Hebron buzzed with voices, advisors, warriors, priests, and petitioners. The same man who once hid among caves now sat upon a throne, hearing the cries of a nation, yet I saw it in his eyes, the quiet weight that no crown could hide. Kings are not made lighter by gold. Each decision he made carried lives within it. Justice, war, mercy, judgment. And sometimes, when the court was empty and the night had settled, I would find him alone, his harp resting across his knees, playing soft melodies that only heaven could hear. I would stand in the doorway, listening. Sometimes he would stop and say softly, Abigail, do you ever wonder if the weight of this crown will crush me? I would walk closer and sit beside him. Only if you carry it alone, my king. But the God who gave it to you will also uphold it. He nodded slowly, tracing his fingers along the strings. I thought the battle ended when Saul fell. But every day, I see a new war, not with swords, but with choices. I smiled gently. And still, you fight best when you listen first. He looked at me then, the same look from that first day in Carmel. Your words, he said, are still my counsel, even now. Yet in every storm, I stood close, not as a queen flaunting authority, but as a woman guarding peace. I often gathered the women of Hebron and spoke to them of God's faithfulness, of the wilderness, of mercy, of how waiting refines the soul. Do not envy the crown, I would tell them, for it shines from afar, but it burns upon the head that bears it. And in quiet moments, when David's burdens seemed heavy, I would remind him. The same hand that lifted you from the field will keep you in the palace. We both knew the truth, power without humility destroys. But humility in power reveals the heart of God. Peace is a fragile thing, easier to speak of than to keep. In the 3rd year of David's reign, tension began to rise between Judah and the northern tribes of Israel. Old wounds from Saul's rule still bled quietly. Every messenger that arrived carried both greetings and grievances. Every feast was shadowed by whispers of division. One morning, while the air was still cool, David called his council together. I stood behind a carved column, as was custom for the queen, silent, listening. Voices clashed like swords. Let us strike first, shouted one commander. No, said another, let us wait, they will submit in time. David's gaze moved across the room, his jaw set but his heart clearly torn. He was a man of valor, but also a man of conscience, and both warred within him. Finally, one elder turned toward him sharply. My king, mercy has served you well, but patience may cost you your throne. A heavy silence fell. I could see the flicker of conflict in David's eyes, that same fire I once saw on the road to Carmel, when wrath nearly overtook wisdom. I stepped forward. May I speak, my lord? The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to me. David nodded. Speak, my queen. I drew a slow breath. When peace trembles, it is not always because the enemy is near, but because fear has entered our hearts. If the Lord established this throne, then he will defend it. To strike before his command is not courage, it is doubt. The elders murmured among themselves. I continued softly, remember Nabal, my king? When anger whispered, take what is yours. Yet the Lord said, wait, and I will fight for you. He has not changed. David's eyes softened, recognition washing over him. One by one, the voices of strife fell silent. Even the commander who had shouted bowed his head. David rose and said, the wisdom of the Lord speaks again through my wife. We will wait. Let peace fight for us this time. That evening, the messengers returned, not with war, but with word of reconciliation. The northern tribes had sworn allegiance. No sword was drawn, no blood was spilled. When David came to me later, he smiled quietly. You have done again what armies could not, Abigail, you have won without fighting. I bowed my head. No, my lord. The Lord simply reminded us both who truly rules. He laughed softly and took my hand. And may he always remind me through you. Years passed like soft wind over the hills of Judah. Children's laughter now echoed in the courtyards of the palace. The fields that once bore the marks of war now bloomed with harvest. Peace, long fought for, long prayed for, had finally come, and in that peace, I often found myself walking alone through the palace gardens at dawn. The olive trees whispered softly in the morning light, their leaves glinting like silver. The same trees that had once shaded me on the road to Carmel now watched over me as queen. I had lived many lives within one. A wife to a fool. A servant of mercy. A wanderer in the wilderness. A queen beside a king, but above all, I had been a woman after God's wisdom. One morning, I sat beneath the olive tree with my journal of psalms and prayers, some written by David, some whispered from my own soul. The sun rose gently over Hebron, spilling gold upon the marble stones. I heard the footsteps I had known for years before I saw him. David approached quietly, a little older now, the weight of time on his shoulders, but his eyes still shining with that same light I saw when God's calling first touched him. He sat beside me without a word. For a long while, we simply watched the sunrise. Then he said softly, the men still speak of that day, Abigail, the day you rode out to meet my wrath. They say your wisdom saved my crown before it was ever placed upon my head. I smiled gently. Then let them also say this, it was the Lord who saved us both. I was only his voice that day. He turned to me, his expression tender. And what voice will you leave behind, my queen? What will people remember when they speak your name? I thought for a moment, then looked at the horizon. Let them remember that wisdom is not found in power, nor in beauty, nor in the applause of men. It is found in obedience. In listening before speaking. In kneeling before acting. David nodded, his eyes misted. Then you have left more than a legacy. You have left a lamp for every soul who walks in darkness. We sat in silence again, the breeze carrying the songs of morning doves. I closed my eyes and whispered, blessed be the Lord, who turns the wilderness into a classroom, the burden into a blessing, and the waiting into the womb of promise. A soft peace filled my heart. I had seen God's faithfulness in every season, in the storm, in the silence, and in the sunrise, and I knew then, as surely as I had known on that long ago road to Carmel, when a woman chooses wisdom over pride, mercy over anger, faith over fear, she writes her story on the very heart of heaven. She rode into danger, and found destiny. She spoke when silence could have been safer. She chose peace when pride demanded war, and through her wisdom, a king found restraint and a nation found peace. Abigail's story reminds us that one voice, guided by God, can change the course of an entire kingdom. Her beauty was her grace, her strength was her faith, her crown was her wisdom. If this story of Abigail touched your heart, let her voice echo beyond this screen. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel where the forgotten women of the Bible rise again. Their courage shining with every new story. Did Abigail's story inspire you? Tell us your favorite moment in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful Bible story. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that wisdom still wins.